4 days before Christmas, my son called and said 6 words that made me feel like a stranger in my own life. "Don't come this year, Dad, please." He said it the way someone says it when they've rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror, steady, almost casual, as if it cost him nothing. There was a pause, and in that pause I could hear my daughter-in-law in the background, her voice low and directing, like a stage manager standing just off stage. My son cleared his throat. "My wife's not comfortable with it. Her family's already visiting, you understand." I said that I did. I don't know why I said that. I didn't understand at all. "My name is Byron. I'm 63 years old now, and I want to be honest with you. I'm telling you this story with 4 years of clarity I didn't have then. I've spent most of that time learning what it actually means to belong somewhere, and more importantly, learning that belonging isn't something you earn through patience and suffering. Sometimes it's something a stranger just offers you, completely without warning, on a cold night in December. I had moved to Kelowna, British Columbia, 14 months before that Christmas. I left Mississauga after the divorce was final and the house sold. It had taken 3 months to close, inspections, one buyer who backed out, another who offered low. When the sale finally went through, I walked away with $340,000 after the mortgage was paid. I put most of it into GICs, kept enough in a savings account to live carefully. My pension from 31 years in provincial government administration wasn't much, but it was steady. I was not wealthy. I was stable, which felt like a different kind of luxury. Kelowna seemed right, smaller than Toronto. The Okanagan Lake was wide and gray in the off-season, but it was there and it was real, and sometimes real things are enough. I had 2 children. My son, who lived in Toronto with his wife and their life that had no room for me, and my daughter, who lived in Vancouver and called me every Sunday, rain or shine, without me ever having to ask. She was the kind of person who made calling feel effortless, like checking in was something she actually wanted to do, not something she felt obligated to. I had learned to be careful not to lean on her too heavily. After my son's call, I sat in my kitchen for a long time with the phone still in my hand. Outside, it was -8. Through the window, I could see the parking lot of my building, half empty, a few cars already collecting frost on their windshields. I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring the way she always did. "Dad, you okay? You sound flat." I told her. She was quiet for a moment, that particular quiet she had when she was choosing words. "He let her make that decision," she said finally. "That wasn't him. That was her." I did know that. But knowing something and being comfortable with it are 2 different things entirely. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to have Christmas dinner," I said. "Just not with them." I found a restaurant that was open on Christmas Eve, a proper sit-down place near the waterfront, not fast food, something with tablecloths and candles and the kind of ambient noise that makes you feel less alone. I booked a table for one. The woman on the phone didn't flinch. People eat alone on holidays more than you might think. I put on a good shirt, pressed trousers, my winter coat, the charcoal wool one I'd bought before leaving Mississauga. I shined my shoes. It was something my father had taught me. If you're going somewhere that matters, your shoes should show it. The restaurant was warm and full when I arrived. Families at the round tables in the center, a couple by the window sharing a bottle of red, her hand resting on his across the tablecloth. A group of adult siblings arguing cheerfully and laughing too loud. The hostess seated me near the edge of the room, a small table against the wall, and left me with a menu and the particular dignity of being alone in a room full of people who were together. I ordered the roast beef. I ordered a glass of wine. I stared at the menu longer than necessary, because looking at a menu is something to do when you have nothing to do. At some point, I stopped pretending I was fine. It wasn't dramatic. No one noticed. I just sat there with my wine untouched and felt the full weight of the thing settle into my chest. Not just the Christmas Eve dinner. All of it. The years of calls that went unanswered. The birthday texts that arrived close to midnight like afterthoughts. The conversations with my son that started as catch-ups and ended as negotiations. The slow, quiet way a person can be pushed to the periphery of a family he helped build. I felt all of it at once, and I couldn't keep it off my face the way I usually could. A woman appeared beside my table. I hadn't seen her walk over. She was somewhere in her mid-70s. Sturdy, clear-eyed, silver hair pulled back, with the kind of face that suggested she had seen enough of the world to know the difference between a man who was fine and a man who was only pretending to be. "I hope you'll forgive me for interrupting," she said, "but you look like you could use some company." I looked up. I said that I was all right. She smiled. It was a kind smile, but it wasn't a gullible one. "My husband and I have a table with too much food and not quite enough people to eat it. Our son is running late, and frankly, Meredith, that's me, doesn't like eating in silence." She extended her hand. "Come join us, we insist." I almost said no. Some instinct told me to protect myself, to keep my grief private the way it's supposed to be kept when you're a man in your late 50s sitting alone in December. But I looked at this woman, Meredith, who had introduced herself by name as if we'd already decided to know each other, and something gave way. "All right," I said. "Thank you." Her husband Percy stood up when we reached the table, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of deliberate handshake that tells you something about a person's character before they've said a word. "Glad you came over," he said simply, as if he'd been expecting me. Their son arrived 20 minutes later with his wife and their 6-year-old grandson, a boy named Kit, who had his grandfather's eyes and the energy of someone who'd been sitting in a car for 3 hours. Kit immediately decided I was interesting, the way 6-year-olds decide things. Suddenly and completely, he climbed into the chair beside mine and wanted to know if I had a dog. I didn't have a dog. "You should get one," he said with great seriousness. We had dinner, real dinner, turkey with stuffing, roasted root vegetables, Percy's insistence on second helpings because the restaurant had gotten the seasoning exactly right. Meredith asked me questions. Not prying ones, just the kind that say I'd like to know who you are, where I was from, how long in Kelowna, what I'd done before retiring. When I mentioned my son, I said only that we were going through a difficult stretch. She nodded. She didn't push. As the evening wound down and Kit had gone half asleep against his grandmother's shoulder, Meredith turned to me. "You must have plans for Boxing Day," she said. "I don't," I said. "Then you'll come to us." She said it the way Percy had said, "Glad you came over," as if this had already been decided and she was simply informing me. She wrote her address on the back of a napkin, in clear, careful handwriting, and pressed it into my hand. I drove home, gripping that napkin on the passenger seat, checking it twice at red lights to make sure it was still there. Boxing Day at their house was the first time in 4 years I'd eaten Christmas leftovers at someone else's kitchen table. Meredith made turkey soup from the carcass. Percy opened wine. Their son, Wendell, was a contractor who worked across the Okanagan, the kind of easy warmth that makes you feel like you've known someone for years. His wife, Cora, made shortbread. Kit wore a Christmas sweater with a moose on it and informed me that his teacher had a dog named after a hockey player, which he considered to be the only sensible way to name a dog. When I left that evening, Meredith hugged me at the door and said, "Same time next Sunday. Bring nothing. We have everything." I almost argued. I brought wine. Those Sunday dinners became the structure of my life in Kelowna. At first, I counted the weeks, convinced this was a kindness with a shelf life, that one Sunday Meredith would open the door, and her face would say, "Oh, you again." It never did. By February, I had a hook by the front door for my coat. By March, Kit had started calling me Uncle Byron, which neither Meredith nor Wendell corrected. I didn't correct it either. Meredith had a way of watching you that made you feel seen without feeling exposed. One Sunday in April, while I was helping her dry dishes and had gone quiet for too long, she said, "You're carrying something today." I told her my son had texted. Just a short message, asking if I was planning to visit Toronto in the spring. "Will you?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "That means no," she said not unkindly, "and that's all right." Percy was quieter, but solid in a way I hadn't experienced since my own father. He'd grown up in northern Ontario, worked the mills until he was 30, then moved west and built something slowly. He didn't give advice. He asked questions. One afternoon, while we were recalking the trim on his back deck, something I'd offered to help with just to have something useful to do, he asked, "You ever think you'll go back east?" "Sometimes," I said, "less than I used to." He nodded, kept working. A minute passed. "Home has a way of moving," he said. You don't always have to chase it. 3 months after Boxing Day, my son called on a Thursday evening. I was reading when the phone rang. I held it for a moment before answering. He started with small talk. How are you? How's Kelowna? How's the weather out there? The texture of it was rehearsed, the kind of conversation designed to soften the ground before the real ask landed. I answered carefully. How was he? How was his wife? Then, Dad, I need to talk to you about something. I set my book down. He explained it carefully, like someone who had practiced. He and his wife wanted to open a franchise, a restaurant chain with locations across Ontario, a well-known name, decent margins if you ran it right. They'd found a location in Etobicoke. The franchise fee alone was $40,000, and the fit-out would cost another $20 or $25 on top. They had some of it. What they needed from me was $60,000, just to bridge the gap, just to carry them through the startup period. He knew what the house in Mississauga had sold for. He knew I had it. You'd get it back, he said, once we're operating. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I said, I can't do that. Dad, I can't give you $60,000. I kept my voice even. That money is my retirement. It's what I live on if my health changes or my pension shifts. I can't hand away $60,000 for a franchise investment I know nothing about. Have you spoken to a business advisor? Have you looked at the BDC? Small business loans exist for exactly this reason. I'm not asking for charity, he said, and now there was an edge. I'm asking my father to invest in his own son, to believe in us. I understand, but you're asking me to rescue a plan that a bank has probably already told you is too risky to finance. That's not investment. That's just rescue with a friendlier name. Silence. You walked away with money from a house that was ours, he said. That was family money. That was our childhood. And you're sitting in Kelowna in your little apartment while your own son is asking for help. I thought about Meredith's table, Percy's handshake on a Christmas Eve when I was a stranger, Kit in a moose sweater asking me about dogs. You call me when you need something, I said. You called before Christmas to say I wasn't welcome at your table. You texted once on my birthday, near midnight, and now you're calling because you need $60,000. I'm not a resource. I'm your father, and those two things have to mean different things. The silence that followed was the longest kind, the kind that fills with everything neither of you will say. So that's a no. That's a no. Another silence. Then his voice came back, quiet and precise, each word chosen to land exactly where it would hurt most. Fine. Then we're done. As far as I'm concerned, you're not my father anymore. Don't call. Don't show up. Don't reach out. You are done to me. The line went silent. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that. The book was still open on my knee. I called Meredith, not to explain everything, just to hear her voice. Come for dinner Sunday, she said. Come early. Percy's making his chili. I'll be there, I said. I told them that evening what had happened. Meredith listened without interrupting. Percy nodded at the right moments. When I finished, he said, He showed you exactly who he is. No more guessing. Is that supposed to make it easier? I asked. No, he said honestly, but it's honest, and honest is what you work with. Meredith reached across the table. You have people who want you here, Byron. That's not a small thing. That's actually quite a lot. 4 years passed. My son went silent completely. No calls, no birthday texts at midnight, nothing. For 4 years I had to decide every few months whether to grieve that absence or simply let it be what it was. Mostly I let it be. The Sundays at Meredith and Percy's became seasons. Summer on their back porch, the Okanagan heat thick and golden. Autumn when Meredith made apple crumble from the trees in the yard, and the whole house smelled of cinnamon and brown sugar. Winter with Percy's chili and the fireplace running, and Kit, older now, losing teeth and growing new ones, wanting to show me things he'd built at school. I watched that boy turn 7, then 8, then 9. I helped Wendell replace the fence boards one September. I drove Meredith to a specialist appointment when Percy's back went out and she needed someone steady. I was there in the way that matters, small, consistent, showing up without needing to be asked. My daughter called one Sunday in January and said she had news. She and her partner were getting married in June. A small ceremony in Whistler, just family and close friends. "Dad, I want you there," she said. "You're walking me in." I was quiet for a moment, and she knew what I was thinking. "I'm inviting my brother," she said carefully. "I know. But he's still my brother, and it's my wedding. I needed you to know before." "You did the right thing," I said. "Those choices are yours." I meant it. She had spent 4 years watching me let go of her brother, without bitterness and without spectacle. She wasn't asking my permission. She was giving me warning because she loved me enough to do that. The wedding was in Whistler in the second week of June, the mountains still carrying snow on their peaks while the valley floor was warm and green. Meredith and Percy drove up from Kelowna. Wendell and Cora came too. Kit was the ring bearer and took the responsibility with a seriousness that made everyone at the ceremony bite back smiles. My daughter was stunning. Her partner, a quiet, steadfast man who had loved her with patience for 6 years, looked at her the way people look at things they have waited a long time for and still cannot quite believe are real. I cried during the ceremony. Meredith sat beside me and passed me her handkerchief without comment, which was exactly the right thing to do. The reception was at a lodge overlooking the valley. Long tables, string lights, a band that moved through 4 decades of music without apology. I danced with Meredith, and then with my daughter. Kit dragged Percy onto the floor and tried to teach him something he'd learned in gym class. Cora laughed until she had to sit down. It was somewhere between the main course and the speeches that I saw my son. He was standing at the entrance to the reception hall, still in his travel clothes, a jacket not quite right for the occasion, the particular unsettled look of someone who had made a long journey and arrived somewhere unexpected. He looked older than when I'd last seen him. His face had settled into something harder, the easy confidence replaced by something careful. I recognized it distantly from bad moments in my own mirror. He was looking at our table. I watched him process what he was seeing. Not just me, but Meredith, her hand resting on my arm as she laughed at something Percy said. Wendell on my other side, refilling my glass without being asked. Kit in his small suit, leaning against my shoulder half asleep. A table where I was clearly the center of something warm, where the people around me had organized themselves toward me the way people do when someone genuinely belongs. I don't know what he'd expected. Me, perhaps, existing at the edge of things. The father he'd always known, grateful for the invitation and careful not to take up too much space. Instead, he found this. After the speeches, I excused myself and walked to where he was standing. "You came," I said. "My sister asked me to." His voice was careful. Not warm, not cold, something in between. I almost didn't. "I'm glad you're here," I said. He looked past me toward the table, toward Meredith and Percy. "Who are those people?" "Family," I said. He looked at me then. His jaw tightened. "You think showing me this makes some kind of point?" "I'm not showing you anything," I said. "I'm at my daughter's wedding with the people who love me. I didn't plan the seating chart." He was quiet. When he spoke again, the edge in his voice had changed into something more complicated underneath it. "I thought about calling," he said. "A few times Christmas last year. I almost did." "You didn't," I said. "No. You could have." He looked at his shoes. For a moment he looked very young, the way he'd looked at 13 when he'd done something he knew was wrong and couldn't find the words to explain it away. I felt something pull in my chest. Not anger, something closer to grief, and also something closer to release. "I'm not going to pretend the last 4 years didn't happen," I said. "I'm not going to tell you that you can come back and we pick up where we left off. It doesn't work that way." "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm not gone," I said. "You made me gone. You told me I was done to you, and I took you at your word, and I built a life in that space. That doesn't mean the door is locked forever. It means you have to knock now. It means you have to show up the way people show up when they mean it." He stood there for a long moment. Around us the reception moved and shimmered. Music, laughter, the sound of Kit somewhere demanding more dessert. All the noise of people who had chosen to be together. "Those people," he said, nodding toward the table one more time. "They actually want you there." "I actually want to be there," I said. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly, working something out behind his eyes. I should find a seat, he said. You should, I agreed. Your sister will be glad you stayed. He walked away. I watched him go. When I turned back, Meredith was watching me from the table, her expression calm and steady. I walked back and sat down, and Percy put a hand briefly on my shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly right. My daughter found me near the end of the night, after the dancing had slowed, and Kit had fallen asleep across 3 chairs, with his jacket folded under his head. She wrapped her arms around me and held on. Thank you, she said, for being exactly who you are tonight. I didn't do anything special, I said. You were there, she said. That's the whole thing, Dad. That's the entire thing. 3 weeks after the wedding, I sat on Percy and Meredith's back porch as a June evening cooled down toward the lake. The lights of Kelowna were coming on across the water. Meredith brought tea. Kit was asleep inside. Wendell and Cora had gone home an hour before. The 3 of us sat together without needing to fill the silence. You did well, Percy said eventually. I thought about my son's face when he looked at our table, the recognition in it, not of me exactly, he'd always known me, but of what I'd become without him, of the life that had grown into the space his absence left behind. I just kept showing up, I said. That's all I did. For 4 years I showed up on Sundays. Meredith reached over and covered my hand with hers, the way she had on the very first Christmas Eve, at a restaurant table where I'd been sitting alone and very nearly convinced that I was finished. That's not nothing, she said. For some people, showing up is the bravest thing they ever learn to do. The lake sat wide and still beyond the fence. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something only it could see. Percy topped up my tea without asking, the way he always did, and the evening settled around the 3 of us like something that had always been there, just waiting to be found.